Rick Santorum, thanks for joining me, former U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. Sounds like you're going to give this a go again.
Well, I haven't made a decision yet, but just like 4 years ago, before you can make a decision, you got to get out and talk to folks and let the process begin, see what kind of support you're going to get. South Carolina is obviously one of those key states where support is a necessity if you're going to go forward.
You came in second in the primary in 2012.
Yeah.
Which I think surprised some people.
Surprised me. I think it's
yeah.
no. I think if you look at it 4 years ago, when I came by here, no one was really paying any attention to us. We were, 1% in all the national polls. Nobody really looked at us and what we were saying, and we just worked very, very hard here in South Carolina and Iowa in particular, those two states, and eventually people looked at the message and the messenger and said, we like the message. I think the messenger's a credible candidate, and we came from really nothing, no money, and had people say you were the last guy standing, and I say it's because we were standing on something. We had a really strong message focused on how we're going to help middle and lower income Americans be able to live the American dream again, and that and particularly focused on manufacturing, getting manufacturing back here, and energy, and construction jobs, and vocational and technical training. Those are the folks who are hurt in America today, and neither party is really doing anything right now to address it. And that's why I'm looking at it again, because I still, now 4 years later, see the same thing. Median income is going down in America. Wages are stagnating. Good jobs continue to go overseas. That's just a problem that's not going to go away unless somebody or some party says we're going to go out there and not just give money, transfer money, but actually create opportunities, and that's the real focus that I'll be taking to Myrtle Beach today.
What did you learn, or what's different with what you've learned when you were doing this back in, I guess, 2011 when you were testing the waters to now? What's the temperature like of the country? Is it different?
Yeah, I'd say, well, first off, this race is a lot more wide open than 4 years ago, just from the standpoint of the race. As far as the country, I think the country is hurting a lot more. I think now you've seen not just 4 years from the Great Recession of 2008, not just 4 years, but now 8 years where people have been struggling. You're seeing, as I mentioned, median income in America is down. Wages over those 8 years just not getting any better, and you're seeing the hollowing out of the middle, and it's happening more and more. Throw on top of that national security. That's the big difference. Is 4 years ago, I think we had 22 debates, and there was one debate on national security, and on the other 21 debates, there may be one question. Now it's a central issue. Look what's going on in Europe. Look what's going on in the Middle East. What many of us, I was talking about in 2012, and the threat of radical Islam, something that I'd been focused on for now better than 10 years, and writing about it, working on legislation. Actually worked 4 years after I left the United States Senate on national security, specifically focused on the threat of radical Islam. That threat 4 years ago looked like it had gone, and now people are realizing this is not just a one organization or one person, Osama bin Laden, but this is a serious problem with over 1 billion Muslims, many of whom, unfortunately, adhere to this radical strand. We have to be much more conscious in addressing it.
I want to talk to you about some of the issues, health care, foreign policy, in a few minutes. But first, I want people who may not know who you are to get a better idea
Sure.
of who Rick Santorum is. You served in the House of Representatives.
I did.
You served as a senator.
Yes.
You have a long history in politics.
Yeah, I served 2 terms in each, which was 16 years total.
We have a lot of people with experience who are thinking to run. We have a lot of people who don't have experience who are thinking to run. Some people may look to the experience and say, well, you know what? We don't want an experienced politician.
Well, I would argue a couple of things. Number one, experience for the presidency is probably a good thing. I think if you look at the last 6 years, we had someone who had no experience, someone who had 4 years in the United States Senate, but was really running 2 of those 4 years. And that hasn't worked out so well for the country. I think having someone particularly with national security experience. I was in Israel just a few months ago, and one of the most senior advisors to Prime Minister Netanyahu said, America better be ready for a war president, someone who has the experience. And That's one of the things, in fact, I think separates, as I look at the field, and one of the concerns that pulls me to consider this race, there really isn't anybody that field has any national security experience. I mean, we have a bunch of governors, which are all well and good, but no national security experience. And the national politicians, the senators who are running, are in their first term in the Senate. None of them have had any kind of realistic experience. I served 8 years on the Armed Services Committee. I worked on, like I said, 4 years in a think tank writing about radical Islam, and I think that's the preeminent threat right now. And that's an area of expertise. I authored major pieces of legislation that actually passed on Syria and Iran, both of which were opposed by President Bush when I offered them, and in fact were opposed for quite some time. And eventually, I was able to convince him of the rightness of those things. They were both sanctions on those countries because of, well, Assad. It's obvious to see why the sanctions were in place, but also Iran and their nuclear program. This was 10 years ago, before many people thought that Iran had a developed nuclear program. So I feel like I have experience that separates us, and I've been on the right side of that experience. So it's not like I have experience like Joe Biden and been wrong, but experience and been right.
Also, just on a personal note, you're a father of 7.
Yes.
Come out of Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Good things come out of Western Pennsylvania,
yeah,
myself included.
A lot of good things come out of Western Pennsylvania. And it's interesting. The race 4 years ago has had a big impact on our family because of my running here in South Carolina, and I have my oldest son, John, worked on the campaign last time around. He took a year off between high school and college, and spent a lot of time down here in South Carolina, and got to know some of these kids from the Citadel, and was so impressed by what he saw after the campaign was over. He announced he wasn't going to go to the small Catholic college that he was planning on going to up north, and decided to come here to the Citadel, and his younger brother Daniel followed him. So I have 2 boys at the Citadel right now. I'd say that's probably the greatest thing I got out of the 2012 race, was having 2 boys down here in Charleston.
So now you got some South Carolina roots.
Well, I do indeed. Well, I have a brother that lives in Hilton Head. He's lived there for 30 years, so we've got a few roots down
Yeah, I
there.
actually met your sister-in-law about 15 years ago when I was working in Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
Yes.
there you go.
So that Santorum name sounds familiar. And she goes, well, my brother.
There you go.
Brother-in-law. I want to take a break. When we come back, like I said, I'd like to go ahead and just talk about some of the issues.
Sure.
All right. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Rick Santorum. Welcome back to Carolina This Week. Rick Santorum's our guest this morning.
Thank you.
Want to talk about some of the issues now. We've got a lot of them out there, domestic, and as you've already been talking about, foreign policy. Let's talk about health care first off. I think that's something that affects just about every American. The state of health care, whether you count in Obamacare or not, the Affordable Care Act, it's not great. And I related this story to Dr. Ben Carson, who was on last week. I recently got a stress fracture from too much running. I had to go get an MRI. My doctor wanted to confirm and said, go get an MRI. So I go to get the MRI, and I get a phone call a couple days beforehand, and the office tells me that it's going to be a $1,200 procedure. Insurance is going to pick up some of it. I'm going to be on the hook for $460. How do I plan to pay? Can I pay this, that, or the other thing? Fortunately, I had a health savings account, was able to pay for it. But it got me to thinking, there are a lot of people out there who may not have that kind of money laying around, let alone insurance. And that's a lot of money to have to come up with, particularly if you depend on your leg. And I know that health care is not a right. Is it a responsibility? What do we do about health care? What do we do about health care costs?
Well, first thing, we have to do something about health care costs. And the problem with Obamacare is it did nothing about health care costs. What it did is it tried to provide health care access. Everything Obamacare is about creating access to insurance, but doing nothing about the principal problem, which is what's going on with the cost of insurance. And I think there are lots of things that we can do on that front. You mentioned health savings accounts. Along with John Kasich, who's now the governor of Ohio, John and I were the first members of Congress to introduce health savings accounts. I have been a leader and an advocate for you being in control of your health care as opposed to the insurance companies or the hospitals and doctors. And the best way to do that is to try to put the resources in your hands and the control and power in your hands. Health savings accounts do that. Unfortunately, we have a president who opposes health savings accounts and has tried to press down what can be put in those accounts and can be saved. One of the things you mentioned, a $465 bill. Had you had health savings accounts over a period of years, well, you can build up money in those accounts. You can save some money, and so when the bad thing happens, then you have some savings, you have a little cushion to help provide for it. That's the whole point of it. And it's creating a system where it provides you the ability to be able to make choices for yourself and to be able to save money and have some things that, and when that rainy day comes. Second thing it does is it puts you in charge. For example, you mentioned an MRI. And you say, well, it's $1,200 procedure. You're probably asking the question to the doctor, is there another procedure I can do that's less expensive that can give you the answers without having to go that $1,200 road? Well, if the insurance was covering it, you just go get the MRI. But, is an X-ray sufficient? Is there a CT scan that can be done that's maybe less, or PET? I mean, there are all sorts of different diagnostic tools. And what happens is doctors tend to just prescribe things thinking, well, someone else is paying for this, you're not. And they don't worry about the cost. Well, if you have a transparent system where everybody knows what the cost is, one of the big problems in the system today, Obamacare didn't solve it, is you have doctors and hospitals who have deals together and you have no idea what cost is. You have no idea how effective it is. You have no idea what your record of your doctor is and how good he is at what he does. No other industry in the country can get away with that. But healthcare does. Why? Because it's primarily government pay and the government lets them get away with it. So we need to pull the government out of it a little bit from the standpoint of overseeing the system. I think we need to keep some government support. In other words, we need to keep tax credits and support for health insurance and for things like health savings accounts. But we have to put the power back in the person.
Let's switch now to foreign policy. You already talked a lot about radical Islam, and I want to talk about what happened in France. And by the way, we're recording this about 2 weeks away from when it's going to air.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully we're talking relatively current right now.
Let's hope nothing's happened since.
Exactly.
Right?
It's tough, and you know that from studying radical Islam and studying what's happening around the world.
Yeah.
How do you handle it? How do you change? It's almost like changing a culture, changing a way people think in different countries. And do you go in with troops? How do you fight this new war?
Well, you have to understand that it is a war that has been around for 1,300 years, really since America, shortly before America. Radical Islam, or expansionist political Islam, had been on the march against Western civilization for 1,000 years. It had overrun and conquered Spain, and most have gone up into, in fact, was in the gates of Austria, in Vienna, Austria, in the 1600s. And so if you look at all of North Africa, that used to be Christian North Africa, it used to be Western civilization there. Same thing with most of the Middle East. So you've seen this continuing spread, and then 300 years ago, Western civilization pushed back, and Islam was no more as a threat. Well, then oil came about, and oil provided resources for an element of Islam to try to rekindle those old glories, if you will, and with a very 7th century Islam. And that's what we're seeing, a 7th century expansionist, very rigid understanding of what Islam is all about. It is not, I agree, shared by most Muslims, certainly not most Muslims in this country, but unfortunately it's shared by a significant number. When you have 1.2 billion adherents, 10%'s a lot of folks. Mm-hmm. And so a small percentage can go a long way in here, and unfortunately it's centered in the Middle East. And if we don't address this problem, and I think what you've seen in France is if you allow this to fester, even with only 8% of French being Muslims, if you allow this to fester and you don't make Muslims confront the cancer within, then you're going to have a problem. And neither President Bush nor President Obama had the courage to go out and call the problem what it is. President Bush called it terrorism. President Obama calls it extremism, won't even call it terrorism. But none of them are calling it what it is, which is radical Islamic terrorism. And you have to attach the ideology to it, and then you have to have the people who say this isn't Islam confront the problem within their religion. That's not happening. And until it does happen, then we're going to be in a ever, I think, downward spiral of trying to deal with expansionist Islam and the Muslim community not coming to terms with it.
You're known as a social conservative, and I have to ask you, do you think a social conservative can win the presidency?
You know, I look at all of the candidates that are thinking about running. I'm not even sure I see one of them that's seriously thinking about it, that's not pro-life and that does not support religious liberty in America and believe that that's a very important part of our heritage that needs to be maintained, and that marriage is an important institution that children deserve a mom and a dad. I don't know of a single candidate out there that's seriously considering on the Republican side. So I guess the answer would be, the question would be, can a Republican still get elected? Because I think the Republicans are going to nominate someone with that point of view, and the question is, can someone like that get elected? And obviously I believe they can.
I really covered my first presidential race getting to talk to the candidates in 2012, and one thing I really noticed there, you hear candidates really playing to the base, and then things start getting a little bit more moderate as the primaries start ticking away. How do you see yourself changing between now and when people actually head to the polls?
You know, one of the things that I found, I won the state of Pennsylvania, which is not a conservative state. I won the state of Pennsylvania with a 92% American Conservative Rating Union, American Conservative Union rating. There you go. And one of the things I think that helped me was authenticity. No voter expects their congressman, senator, or president to agree with them on everything. What they expect is honesty, integrity, and authenticity, and a real desire to try to help people who are hurting in our state, in our country, and a desire not to follow the crowd, but to be there for the people of this country, not for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, not for this ideology or that, but it's out there fighting to do what's best for the people who make this country work. And we were successful in 1994 and 2000 and tough election years, and certainly in 2000 when George Bush, I was the only conservative to win a Senate election in a state that George Bush lost. And it was because we were able to focus on those issues and get people to understand that even though they may not agree with me on everything, they believed that they could trust me. And I think trust is a big factor right now. We have a president not a lot of people trust, and unfortunately on the Republican side, nobody trusts. And unless you have that in Washington, you can have, and what I've noticed is, you can have real serious disagreements in Washington, but if there's trust, then you can get things done. The problem is not ideological divide in Washington. It's not, there's no trust. And if you look at our track record, I was as conservative as any member of the Senate, but we got a lot of things done with folks who I disagreed with on other issues, but when we could find common ground, we took advantage of it, and we made a difference.
So if you were president, both houses were Democrat, you think you'd be able to find middle ground?
I was the author of the Contract with America Welfare Reform Bill back in 1994. And when I came to the Senate, even though I was the first year in the United States Senate, I was the manager of the Welfare Reform Bill on the floor of the United States Senate. I think conservatives will look back, if you ask any of the Tea Party folks who were at this event this weekend, what was the greatest accomplishment during the Republican holding of Congress, they'd probably say welfare reform. And President Clinton vetoed that bill twice. We had to go back and rewrite it and compromise, but the compromises were never on the things that we knew were the most important things to accomplish, which was work requirements and time limits. And so you can make, and we got 70 Democratic votes for the greatest conservative accomplishment in the United States Senate, and Bill Clinton signed it. So yeah, you can get things done. You just have to understand that you can't get everything you want all the time, and you have to be willing, particularly when you have a divided Congress, you have to be willing to take the best you can get. And I think most conservatives today would say welfare was pretty darn good as the best you could get.
I have one last question for Rick Santorum, and I'm going to ask it after the break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Carolina this week. My guest this morning, Rick Santorum, former senator, congressman, and possibly presidential candidate once again. Former presidential candidate, maybe once again. Last question for you. So you did get in the race. We're going to play some real hypotheticals here, but and I need a quick answer on this.
Okay.
Hypothetical, you win the election, first day in office, first term in office. What are you going to focus on?
Helping people in America believe and hope again that the American dream is there for them. And if we can do that, people talk about great threats to liberty. I think the greatest threat to liberty is the people who don't believe that America works anymore, that it's not working for them. And if we can develop and bring people together on an agenda that can create jobs and opportunity for the ladder of success to be out there to help improve the quality of families in America. I think that's another important part of this, which is what we can do to strengthen families. We can do that 1-2 punch. I think we can get America feeling good about itself again, which is high time.
All right. Thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure.
All right. We'll be right back.